Welcome to the 4 Pillars of Men's Health, a podcast of resources for restoring vigor and vitality, bringing you top influencers in the men's health arena, case studies of men who have succeeded and how they did it, and cutting-edge teaching on men's health issues from America's leading men's health guru, Dave Skattum. Get ready to take steps towards good health. Here's your host, Dave Skattum.
Hey, welcome to the 4 Pillars of Men's Health. It's my belief today that every person's journey towards good health is unique and inspirational. And whether it's a journey towards getting your nutrition adjusted right, your exercise and fitness program, but your mindset or your spiritual life, I think everybody has this unique story, this unique journey. And I'm so excited to get into this podcast series I'm doing where I'm interviewing guys about their journey and what's happened with them. And I also believe that every one of us has unique strengths and unique weaknesses. And so it's my honor today to have on as a guest on my show today a guy named Douglas Krieger that I've been watching from afar, from clear across the world, Johannesburg, South Africa. And it's pretty cool to watch people run their business and things like that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about Douglas before we start our interview. Douglas is an author of 8 business books. His kind of focus is around business and mindset. And we're going to be talking about one of his newest books that he's just now, I don't even think it's out yet, but we're going to be talking about that. And he's also a professional speaker. I've seen him speak on the national stage at Toastmasters Convention, and he's been inducted into the Speakers Hall of Fame by the Professional Speakers Association. He also, this is something you should check out, he also hosts a daily YouTube show called From Amateur to Expert. And that's a really cool thing. He has like 2 million viewers and just really exciting there. He lives in Johannesburg, South Africa, where he is currently happily locked down with his wife, Vanessa, and their 3-year-old son. And welcome to the 4 Pillars of Men's Health, Douglas. I'm so excited to have you here. And how you doing this morning?
Thanks so much, David. It's a great pleasure to be joining you. And yes, you mentioned the 3-year-old. So if you hear any dinosaur roars in the background, please just excuse them. But what a joy and a pleasure to be chatting with you from across the world. And don't you wish you had shares in Zoom right now?
That's right. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Yeah. So, hey, I just to kind of get us started and get people to know you a little bit more, what's on your front burner right now? What is like, gets you up in the morning, gets you going, get the juices flowing in your life? What's going on right now?
Yeah, thanks. My world is a little strange at the moment. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm a speaker, and the first industry, I think, to hit the skids with the crisis has been the events and the speaking industry. And yet at the same time, I've had something a little unusual happen to me. I was approached by Penguin Books with the question, would you be able to write a book on how small businesses can survive this crisis quickly? And when they said quickly, they gave me 10 days to do it from one end to the other. Whoa. Fortunately, I was able to write an entire book in 10 days.
Wow.
Now, this was a little unusual in the sense that people contributed from all around the world. We have some amazingly generous entrepreneurs, professors, professionals all over the show, people from Texas, Croatia, the UK, New Zealand, and they simply threw ideas at me. So I didn't have to do the research for this particular one, which was a little unusual. I simply had to aggregate the best ideas and put them together. And it's been some kind of an exhausting record for me. Wow. And the Penguins say it's a record for them as well. And it's also a bit of an unusual one in the sense that this is one of the rare occasions when a South African book is being sold by Penguin around the world. So it comes out in your part of the world, it goes to the UK. I recently received an email saying it'll be published in Romania. Really? First time I'll ever be able to read one of my books in Romanian.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
So, and it's keeping me busy and out of mischief.
Yeah, so I have like a little bit of an advanced outline of what's going on with your book, and it's called Virus Proof Your Small Business. And I'm a small business owner, and I really want to talk to you a little bit about that, but that's going to be a teaser. We're going to save that till the end. But I want to launch into this idea of health and what makes a person healthy. Say we're in one of those Greek theaters where they have the big columns, and you put this ideal person up on top of one of these columns, and you said to yourself, that is my ideal man. He is like perfectly healthy, and that is how everybody should be. What do you think? I mean, what is that person like? How do you see that person?
I'm going to morph two characters together there, and I'm going to start with Brad Pitt in Fight Club and end with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I think in between those two, Brad Pitt in that particular movie was a very low body fat at that point in time. But I actually aim for a little bigger than that, which is kind of funny, because if you met me at high school level, I was the scrawny kid. My legs looked like the beginning of a barcode, and the great sort of tragedy of my life has actually been trying to put on weight rather than keep it off. So, I was one of those unusual creatures that joined a gym in order to try and actually put on a bit of physical mass rather than trying to lose it. And I'm 39, I turned 40 this year, and I think I've been successful in that. I've really fallen in love with weightlifting. Yeah. About 10 years ago, I actually started the whole process, and I read Arnold Schwarzenegger's old complete encyclopedia of bodybuilding, and that got me into it. And at first, of course, when you start out, you think to yourself, well, one day at the Mr. Olympia, the genetics are simply never going to allow for that. But I love it anyway. I mean, it's great fun.
A combination of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that's some vivid imagery there. So on the flip side, we talked about this healthy guy, and I'm just trying to draw out some contrast in your mind about, what is it that makes us healthy or unhealthy? What if you now we're looking on the ground at the bottom of this pillar, and there's somebody that's not healthy down there. In contrast to the guy that you put up on top, how do you see, if you're just traveling around in your sphere of influence, what do you see as being unhealthy in a person? What do you think?
I suspect one of the most useful tests of basic health is, provided you have your mobility, you're able to move around. I think the question becomes, can you run? And that sounds like such an obvious thing to ask, but people get into their 30s, 40s, and 50s and discover that they're not able to run, not even for a short span of time. I think that's one of the most sort of really a fundamental, a basic test of human capacity to do. Can you still run? And I must just tell you, every now and again, my family and I go down to the coast on a holiday, and there is an embankment that goes from our ocean down at the city of Durban up to sort of a grassy plain, probably about 100 feet or so away from the coast. And every year I challenge myself to see whether I can still run up that embankment. and at this stage, it's getting a little more challenging. Yeah. When I arrive at the top these days, I'm less capable of having a conversation, but I'm glad to say that I can still do it. So for me, though, I've actually really fallen in love with the whole idea of weights training, and that obviously goes a little way beyond simple health concerns. Right. And I've discovered that even if you don't have the genetics for it, it is deeply satisfying to build that personal discipline of going to gym, of lifting weights, of working different muscle groups. Yeah. Looking at it from the outside, prior to getting into weight training, I used to think of it as a fairly sort of physical and not intellectual thing to do. Something that doesn't require terribly much brain power. Yeah. I have since changed my mind on that topic. Mm-hmm. I've come to believe that the gym is the place where you actually develop discipline, where you follow a program, you build the sort of mind-body connection, and it's amazing how transferable those lessons are. I mean, just stopping at the idea of discipline, for example, I've also found that having a gym routine takes you away from this dynamic of working when you feel like it. When you don't feel like it, you've got to go anyway. Discipline doesn't care whether or not you feel like it. You simply get up, you pack your bags, and you go. Yeah. And I find that makes a big difference. It's a transferable skill. In the world of writing, in the world of producing and running your own business, that level of discipline that says you do it whether you feel like it or not turns out to be a game changer.
I can really relate to that idea about running. It wasn't too long ago that I was in that case where I physically could not run. It felt like I remember trying to run with one of my sons, and it was like I felt like something was going to blow apart in my lower body.
You immediately trained that muscle that goes from the top of your head down to the bottom of your ankle.
Yeah, that's right. And through baby steps and getting back in shape, now I'm a ultra runner and an Ironman. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and it does things for your self-esteem, doesn't it? It changes your perception of yourself.
Yeah. And that whole idea about discipline and routine that you just mentioned is I see. I never thought of that in my experience, but I think that's really true. And so that's really good. So what? Let's get a little personal here.
Sure.
What is your biggest challenge, do you think, in becoming a person of good health? What do you see as one of your biggest challenges?
I think for me, I have a naturally skinny frame. I'm not a big guy to begin with, and it's taken a lot to overcome things that larger men find much easier. I mean, if you take, for example, a practical example of that, for most people, your legs tend to be your strongest muscle group.
Yeah.
It has taken years to build up my legs now. If you had to see me today, you would never know that I'd struggled to do it. But that was the product of 5 or 6 years just to get to what we might call average, and then a few more years after that to get to what we might call good. Wow. And my own dad hurt his lower back when he was a younger man, so I've been terrified of that most of my life. I'm very conscious of back safety and so forth. So I took it easy and I learned the proper form, the proper way of going about it, and I built slowly. And I think that has stood me in really great stead, learning that discipline, learning the proper form, making sure you don't hurt yourself. And rather than being so gung-ho that you kind of kill yourself in your first time out, spending the time and slowly but surely building it up has actually been a very satisfying experience. Yeah. I still find that I struggle with things like muscle cramps and so on. But I found, there are all manner of useful products available for that. If you just go into a chemist or a gym store, you find things like anti-cramp salts that come with potassium, products like that, and they make a big difference. So to this day, probably the most practical thing with which I struggle is just pulled hamstrings. You overdo the exercise on the legs, and at 3 a.m., you jump out of the bed sheets, and your wife wonders who's broken into the house. It turns out that all that's happened is that my hamstring has clenched up. It's a silly problem to have, but it's a real one.
Yeah, but when it's happening, it's not too silly. I feel
it's all
right now.
You can't answer questions at that point in time. What's wrong? What's wrong?
Yep. And I really like the idea that you mentioned about building slowly. And it's almost like when you want to go from one place of health to a higher level of health in your life, it's almost like you really need to spend some time building some kind of a foundation so that you can prepare your body to take on this extra exertion that you're about ready to dump on it. Otherwise, just like you said, you end up being hurt or just give up, because it's too much.
Absolutely. And I think particularly for young men, we tend to emphasize the wrong things when we start out. Go into any gym around the world and you see the guys sort of 19, 20 years old going into a gym for the first time. And you can see that their goal, their orientation is to try to pick up and swing the heaviest weight that they can possibly manage. And they believe that it's impressive. They believe that it's necessary to do so. And it's absolutely untrue. You see the older, more experienced guys lifting less weight, but doing a better job of it.
Yeah.
Nobody cares how much weight you're lifting. Nobody is watching. I mean, honestly, people are simply not watching your workout. Mm. So what you want to aim for, and I mean, this is something that I sort of learned the long, slow, hard way, is a rep range that is within the bounds of safety and reasonableness. And in the world of weightlifting and bodybuilding, that's usually between about 8 to, say, 15 repetitions of any exercise. If you can't lift a thing 8 times, the chances are you're doing some damage. Unless you're going for powerlifting, unless you are just a genetically massive, strong guy, and that's the point, you really want to make sure that you can lift something at least 8 times, and after that, you're pretty much safe. There is, of course, a danger on the other side of that scale, which is if you can lift it 20 or 30 times, then you're doing cardio. You're not lifting weights anymore.
So if I know that you mentioned you have a son, Michael? Is it?
Yeah, little Michael Kruger.
Think about when your past history, and you mentioned that you started out as kind of more scrawny, tinier person.
Yeah.
And so looking back over your life and to where you are now, where you're I've seen you, you're pretty muscular.
Why, thank you.
You look a little bit Arnold, And so,
if you write that down, I'll quote you on it.
Yeah, that's right. But in just to kind of frame this a little bit, looking back over your life and then looking at your son Michael, what do you think are some of the key things that you've experienced that maybe that you could recommend to your son Michael and other people around you, the key things that have brought you to this place where you've been able to put some muscle mass on? And I mean, was there some negative things that happened to you? Was there some positive things that pushed you in that direction? Were there people? What happened that you could tell Michael that this is what you should do?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is sort of a multiple part answer to that. The first one is, I think when you're younger, when your bones are still forming, and prior to reaching that age where you can safely lift weights, which really is in your 20s, you shouldn't be doing it sooner than that. Is you need to find something that you fall in love with. So, for instance, at school level, I didn't have a big love of the kind of sports that we did in South Africa, which were soccer, rugby, very much the sort of the classic team sports. I found that I loved basketball, and that was something that we didn't do in South Africa, it just didn't exist here. So we formed a small team of kids all by ourselves, and that was something that we did after school each day. I also then got into skateboarding. And there again, I mean, that's very much of an American and classically a Californian sport. But in South Africa, although it wasn't big, it was something that I adored. And that kept me extremely physically fit. So you don't... I almost worry about looking for something to do in order to keep fit. What you rather want to do is to look for something that you love doing, whether that's as simple as hiking or as complex as skateboarding. And it's amazing how much of a difference that can make. There are studies that actually point out that one of the very few things we can do to increase IQ and the effectiveness of our brain is physical exercise. Beyond that, there is not terribly much you can do to actually impact how well your brain works, other than basic health, getting enough sleep, getting enough nutrition, and so on and so forth. But it turns out that exercise is one of the rare things that makes a very, very big difference. And it has to do with spatial relationships, movement, and so forth. It actually does impact the brain. So if you find something you love, that really will make an extraordinary difference. Then the second part of what made a huge impact on my life is when I was in sort of my early 20s, I didn't believe that I had it in me to start gym. It just seemed like a distant foreign world. I was very much a kind of the intellectual kid. I liked my books and so on. And my best friend did me an interesting favor. He gave me a small compliment and he lowered the bar. And what I mean by that is he said, look at your forearms. You've got good lines on your forearms. And he said, what you should do is just do a couple of push-ups every day. That'll do it. And this combination of you've already made a little bit of progress, this sort of gift of a compliment that he handed me, allied with this idea of lowering the bar, like you don't have to go all out, just do a little bit of this, was such a wonderful revelation for me. And I tried it, and it was the beginning of getting started. That then generated a small degree of belief in myself, which led to, well, why not try going to a gym? Why not try lifting up a weight, and so on? And I think what we tend to do is, whether it's writing a book, getting in shape, any of the big projects we tackle, we tend to almost mentally picture them as this mountain we will climb one day. And in the world of writing, I tell people who are interested in writing books, I say, don't think of it as writing a book one day. Think of it as writing a longer essay and get going now. So you actually lower the bar psychologically in terms of your own perceptions of how hard this is, and you just make a start. That start is enough to encourage you, to spur you on, and it gets you going. Just getting going in the first place. That's the hard part.
Just a little baby step.
Absolutely.
Just start with something simple that will lead to, maybe it'll open up another door. It's like,
if we want to get really deep and philosophical on this one, there's an economist and historian by the name of Dr. Thomas Sowell, and he studies wealth. And he makes the simple but profound point. He says, there's nothing interesting about studying poverty because it's zero. It represents nothing. And he says, all nations start there. All companies start there. All families start there. Everyone starts at zero at some point in history. He says, what is interesting is the beginnings of how to generate. Now, exactly the same thing applies whether you're writing a book, starting a big project, or beginning to get into shape. Zero is uninteresting. There's no information to be had there. But the thing that is useful is that very first step, even if it's a small thing, that begins to generate, that begins to accumulate, that begins to build. And it builds faster than we assume it will. When you start off going to gym, the first few weeks, I mean, you see no difference. You just hurt everywhere. You wake up every morning and you go, what am I doing? Everything hurts. I'm in pain all the time. And you find that over the course of, say, a couple of months, you don't see much change. But over the course of, say, the first year to 2 years, the change is astronomical. So it is very small, very incremental on a day-to-day basis. And yet, that first year, that second year, the time is going to go by anyway. If you're able to keep to it with discipline, it's astonishing how much you can achieve in just 1 year.
And I love the tie-in with Thomas Sowell. And I haven't actually studied his work, but I hear a lot when people talk about economics. Thomas Sowell,
well, he's my intellectual hero. I've written a couple of books on wealth, and much of it is informed by his thinking. He's got a number of audio books, and I find that just downloading those from Audible is it's a game changer. I mean, he does. There's a bit of a departure, but it's so fascinating. He takes clans from the Highlands of Scotland, and he studies their behavioral norms and the kind of violence between clans, and he traces that down to gangs in Chicago today. And he shows that what we think of as this kind of urban culture in certain areas comes from the Highlands of Scotland. And it's such a compelling argument. You look at it and you go, it's mind-blowing. Really? His whole thing is cause and effect about topics that we would never have considered, and really, really interesting content.
Yeah, he's like a brain, man. So
oh yes, he is.
Here's the second to the last question before we get into talking about your book. Put a crown on Douglas's head and give you a magic wand that you could, like, if you were the ruler of the world, what kind of things would you put in place to help men and women around the world become more healthy? What do you think would be some of the most impactful things that you could ensure that people do to become healthy?
Yes, I give you a strange answer to that one, but I think it's possibly a good answer. I put people to sleep every night. And I know that sounds like such a silly, trivial thing, but the degree to which your sleep impacts on your health is unbelievable. And I say that as someone who's actually struggled with insomnia for many years. This is not wisdom in the bags you're seeing under my eyes. It's sleep deprivation. But yeah, it turns out, I mean, when you actually go into the studies on how much damage it does to you, not getting enough sleep, to your health, to your thinking, to everything, it is staggering. And I'll just share sort of a very personal insight with you there. A while back, I went and chatted with my GP. And I said, look, I don't actually want to be on any kind of a drug. I don't want a sleeping tablet per se because it's addictive and it causes other problems. But there are things that they can prescribe that do very basic things, like it's sort of a light anxiety relief that just helps you to switch off at night. For a lot of people like myself, it's simply that your brain won't switch off. And anything that touches on or influences anxiety and switches that off just helps you to sleep. Now, I don't think of myself as a particularly anxious person, but certainly I can't switch my brain off at night. And I find that just that small amount of medication makes a huge, huge difference.
I was expecting that answer, but I'll tell you, I have this, I don't know if you can see it, but I have this, it's called an Oura ring, O-U-R-A. And that's what it's all about, is monitoring your sleep and how that impacts your ability to function as a human being is amazing.
It really is. And there's so many practical things we can do too. I mean, by now, most people know, don't stare at your cell phone screen before you go to sleep. It's the routines, it's make the room cool. But unless you do these things intentionally, they don't get done. You've actually got to make a bit of a program and an effort out of it.
Yes. And just the impact of sleep is so dramatic. And wow, that's, and thank you for being a healthy person. And now, now you can transfer that onto your sphere of influence with Michael and people you speak to, and people see that. People see that you're a healthy person and that you are moving in that direction. And I think that's what it takes, is us being that way, and it just transfers around us. So
absolutely, if you can model good values, it's always a powerful thing to do.
Yeah. So let's talk about this virus-proof your small business. Here's your subtitle. It says 50 ways to survive COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah.
Wow. And what did you really, I think you said earlier that you wrote this in 1 week?
1 week flat. And there were several things that contributed to making that happen.
Yeah.
Our story begins with a 12-year-old Douglas taking typing class in high schools. I mean, I can actually touch type because I always wanted to be a writer. Yeah. And just from a sheer mechanical level, the fact that I can type about as fast as I can think or speak makes a world of difference. So that's the first sort of part of the puzzle. The second part is that this is now book number, in fact, I was busy writing book number 8 when it was interrupted. So this effectively becomes book number 8. Yeah. But having done anything multiple times, you start to discover how to do it well and how to do it quickly. So I'll give you a very simple example. Many people who struggle with writing their first book, they don't know how you actually begin the writing process. They sit down and perhaps stare at a screen and go, well, what do I do now? Yeah. And there are very simple, I hesitate to use the word formulas. They almost become kind of a gut reaction, just something you learn naturally to do. That becomes part of the writing process. For example, the best way to make a point come alive is to turn it into a little picture story. And you also then learn that because you are teaching an audience in a nonfiction book, you also have to apply it to their lives. So a very simple formula like point, story, application. You learn how to do that and do it very quickly. I had to populate 50 different chapters with 50 practical ideas that help entrepreneurs. And when you've been doing that for many years, it becomes the easiest thing in the world to go, okay, so here's the point we have to make, wrap it up in a quick story, tell people how to apply it to their lives, move on. And it's just that level of experience that makes it so much easier. But yes, I mean, it's a small book. It was intended to be a small book, but 1 week flat.
So chapter 20's title is Think and Speak Visually to Maximize Effectiveness.
Yes.
Can you do that little program that you just did? Or tell us about that chapter. Wrap it up however think would be.
Fantastic. Very gladly. So think and speak visually. You have now discovered that it is impossible to keep your physical doors open. Perhaps, depending on your scenario around the world, you might even be in lockdown right now. At the very least, people might be hesitant to walk through your doors. Yeah. Now, let me just pause you for a second, then let you into what I've done. I've been saying you. And I've created a little hypothetical picture story talking about your doors, your world. Yeah. So that's just something that you pick up as a writer. You simply learn to do that. Then I would go on to say, you may need to open your doors digitally, and that entails a number of practical things. I then go into simple, practical, applicable ideas like check that your website is actually up and working. Yeah. We get into more complex ideas than this in the book, but the simplest ones are often the most profound, which is when last did you check that all the links on your site are actually live? If someone tries to order from you today, can they do so? Will it reach you? Shop yourself as your own customer and make sure that it practically gets through. Then I go into a little bit of detail from research groups like Forbes magazine, talking about how many businesses have gone online recently, how the trend is picking up. And I go into other ideas about how, for example, you can aggregate tribes around your brand. And here I invite business owners to think a little laterally. For example, if you previously ran a cinema and you showed the latest Hollywood blockbusters, chances are you can't do that right now. What is at the core of what you do? One way of answering it is the movie itself. Another way of answering it is if you think about, say, the latest Star Wars or Star Trek feature, is you are a place for sci-fi fans and tribes and followers to kind of get together and geek out about the latest offering in their world. So can you do that in a different forum? can you be the place that aggregates those people, that enables that conversation, and by doing so, you become the thought leader to that tribe of people. So you're no longer showing a video. You're doing something that gives the same value in a different way. Now, that may lead directly to sales right now, or it may not. It may simply aggregate those tribes and become part of building your brand for the future. So that's the kind of thing that we consider.
Talk to your competitors. What?
Yes.
What? How? What are you? Where's that going? What are you talking about there?
Strange and counterintuitive thought. And to most people, during business as usual, it's a fairly distasteful idea. The last thing we want to do is to talk to our competitors. However, right now, things are as uncertain and as unsettled as they have ever been. And a basic wealth formula, perhaps even the basic wealth formula, is buy low, sell high. If you are able to attain something at its lowest point of cost and then the value accelerates, that's wealth 101. So right now, you might discover, for example, that your competitors are actually, they may have had enough. They want to exit the game. They don't want to weather the storm. They just want to get out of it and do something different. If that is the case, could you buy the business? Could you team up with them? Are there creative things that you could be doing right now? Some industries also lend themselves wonderfully to this idea of a non-zero sum game. So, for example, myself as a speaker, among the professional speaking fraternity, the professionals are uniquely willing to share ideas with one another and to share skills, knowledge, and insight. And the reasoning behind that is that we sell an intangible product. Our excellence on stage and the value of ideas is really what we sell.
Right.
Now, the degree to which everyone does a good job of that is the degree to which we are perceived as valuable. So there is no downside to my competition doing a good job. And you might be in one of those industries right now where you need to team together, you need to help one another get through, and you can share and pool ideas, or perhaps you can even share and pool customers. There are creative ways of looking at that as well. Now, we can even go beyond that one. For example, I heard a wonderful story. Somebody actually called me and told me about this industry association. Every industry has its association that tends to have, say, the annual awards, the annual events, and so forth. And the customers of this particular group actually contacted the conveners and they said, look, we know we've paid our attendance fee for this year. We have paid for the prize money for the awards and so on. And they said, keep the money. We actually want you to keep it because it's in our best interests that the association survive. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to do. So talking to people in your industry, talking to your competitors, the associations, there are opportunities there that may not have been there before. Best time to make contact and to think creatively across a broad spectrum of people.
Eyes are open.
Eyes wide open. Everything is changing. Yeah. And, the reality of it is going to pick up again. Everything may look a little different on the far side, but it will pick up. And, of course, it also entails that the dabblers, the chancers in any industry are very likely to exit the industry at the same time, sadly, as some of the top professionals. And it very likely means that you will have less competition on the far side. So while you can, serve and lead with excellence.
Good for you. If you listeners out there, if you want to learn more from this really healthy guy, Douglas, the point of this book is it was to collect and share creative ideas for survival, what to do about cash flow, how to retain your staff. Wow, this is really good stuff. How to work remotely, how to restructure business or offer something entirely different based on your available resources. You kind of touched on that, and how to maintain profitability and how to begin preparing for post-crisis business, because it will, you're right, it will pick up. If we can weather this, we in the States here or around the world during the Great Depression of the early 20th century, there's lots of people who became wealthy, very wealthy.
Absolutely.
Because of that situation. And so if we can get our mindset that way and use creative ideas like you've put into place here, get this book and read it, and you'll come out smelling like a rose.
Absolutely. That's the plan.
So let's, why don't you wrap it up with any final thoughts on health or your book? And then why don't you tell us a little bit, I'll put this in our show notes so people can get your contact information, whatever you give us here. But wrap it up with whatever final point you want to make and how people can get a hold of you.
Lovely. A parting thought that applies both to your business and to your health is don't get stuck. I've spoken to someone recently, a colleague of mine, who was busy writing a book and has simply stopped. He said, well, everything is so uncertain that I've stopped writing the book. I personally can't make sense of that. In South Africa at the moment, we've got this 3-week period of lockdown. What an ideal time to get the book done. It makes no sense to stop. And I think the same applies with your health as well. What does uncertainty mean? It means that your personal confidence is at a low ebb. Well, that's in your hands. You can act now. You can take charge of your health now. You can start to lay down the small building block foundations of what could become your business, your book, your program, your health, your new approach to revolutionizing your own fitness, your own well-being. It only takes small steps, but only you can take them. So don't get stuck, I think is really going to be my leading advice. There is so much that you can do right now, as in during normal times, and even more so during a crisis. Clever ideas acted upon are your best friend. Getting stuck is pretty much the end of the game. So as the elite forces say, movement is life. Keep moving. In terms of getting hold of me, I've been trying to give away the ideas from the book on YouTube just to get them out there as quickly as possible. So on the YouTube channel, if you looked up Douglas Kruger, my show is called From Amateur to Expert. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been putting out the chapters in small video form. And again, it's because business is not a zero-sum game. We want everyone to prosper so that everyone prospers. Let's get the ideas out there. A tail-end thought on that one is, if you try something that works, please share it. Anything that works in terms of business, health, helping people to get through right now, share the idea. We need the ideas. We need to get one another through. And finally, my website is just my name, douglaskruger.com.
Great. All right. And it's my understanding, this book has not gone out yet, is that? But you can get it?
Oh, it actually goes live in most countries around the world, I believe, either tomorrow or the next day. Okay. So easiest place to check is Amazon. And, even if it's not live yet, you can do a pre-order there now. So it's up. Virus Proof Your Small Business by Douglas Kruger, published by Penguin. In some countries around the world, they will go straight to physical print. In places like South Africa, where we're on lockdown, we simply can't do it. So we're going ebook. But yeah, easiest place just to check is Amazon. And I've seen this morning you can actually pre-order it already.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Douglas, thank you so much for being on this show and for these insights in good health. And I think this book is critical for this time where we're at. Virus proofing your small businesses. Yeah. I mean, wow, every entrepreneur should be reading this book.
Yeah, we're really hoping, and the folks at Penguin, just the discussions behind the scene, they've been saying, it gives us goosebumps to think that we might save actual lives as a result of this. So I mean, really, we hope it gets out there and does some good. It's a small book, it's an inexpensive book, but hopefully it's going to be a valuable book.
You've been listening to The 4 Pillars of Men's Health with Dave Skattum. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit the4pillarsofmenshealth.com.